Praise be the organizers. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Carl, for making this all happen. And before I start to read, I wanted to reference a document that Sharon read at the very beginning of the conference. I apologize for not going into the provenance of how I got this particular piece of paper, but it's a copy of a document that's in a folder marked UNESCO 1964 from the Bibliothèque Nationale, the Archives Xenakis. And its title is 5 Points Susceptible of Being Developed in an Overall Project. And I won't read the entire thing, but I'll read point 1 and point 4 here. Number 1. Modern man's forced passivity in relation to the arts is a very serious problem. Should we combat it, and if so, how? And point number 4, create a radically new logico-mathematic charter for music pedagogy capable of serving a maximum number of populations in collaboration with musicologists, psychologists, sociologists, and enlightened pedagogues employing various modalities according to the various countries. So let me read here. When we think of the composer Xenakis, teaching isn't the first thing that comes to mind, yet teaching, or perhaps more properly a composer's relationship to the academy, has been a touchy subject for the last half-century. When we think of a composer, say Milton Babbitt, Barry Vercoe, George Crumb, or Pauline Oliveros, we often sort them in terms of their relation to academe. Xenakis is perhaps unique as a post-war European composer by way of his extended association with a U.S. institution, Indiana University at Bloomington. In my talk today, I hope to give some sense of his accomplishments there, of his teaching, and of his relationship to contemporary music in the university. There's an ambiguous moment in Xenakis' interview with Bálint András Varga. Xenakis speaks of the alacrity with which he accepted Aaron Copland's invitation to teach at Tanglewood for the summer of 1963. The ambiguity comes from what has preceded this story in Varga's interview. Xenakis had been speaking of the difficulties of supporting his family, taking in engineering work, and enduring Herman Scherken's reproaches for ever leaving Le Corbusier's studios. Was Xenakis eager to come to the United States to teach, or was he relieved to escape the precarious life of a freelance worker for a few months? In Xenakis' earliest contact with Indiana University, Assistant Dean Charles Webb remarked, quote, "I'm not at all sure he is interested in being associated with IU." Although the university offered Xenakis Xenakis initially accepted only a one-year part-time appointment as head of a Center for Mathematical and Automated Music. His primary goal was not to teach, but to conduct research into what he felt were fundamental issues of art and technology. There is the lingering story that Xenakis had no students, or perhaps only one, Yuji Takahashi. In interviewing those who took his classes at Bloomington, one interviewee remarked, quote, "If we weren't his students, what were we?" In actuality, Xenakis had no shortage of students, and students have had many opportunities to interact with Xenakis. Jim Harley, for example, in his preface to his book, Xenakis, His Life in Music, mentions 3 separate opportunities in the mid-1980s where he attended lectures by the composer. Of the many seminars and lectures that Xenakis gave over the course of his life, 2 occasions are notable for their longevity. One is his 5-year stay at Indiana University from 1967 to 1972, and the other, beginning immediately after his resignation there, was his seminar at the Sorbonne, which lasted from 1972 until 1989. Xenakis' program of research at Indiana built on work dating back to his association with Scherken's Gravazana studio, and provided a paradigm for both the Bloomington CMAM and the Paris EMAMU, which were in effect parallel institutions under his direction. In the spring of 1971, the Indiana State University system approved Xenakis' program for a master's degree in mathematical and automated music. The school year 1971-72 was therefore the only year that the degree was offered while Xenakis was a faculty member, and the offering was quickly deleted in the spring of 1973. To my knowledge, only one student came close to obtaining the degree. In the transition following Xenakis' departure, the student found that the music department wouldn't credit his computer science studies, But the computer science department would credit his studies with Xenakis, and so he graduated with a master's in that field. So if you'll look at the first list on the handout here, it might be a little easier to follow along the next paragraph. The 1972-73 University Bulletin published the requirements for a Master of Music in Mathematical and Automated Music, shown here. The major itself consists of 6 semesters of study, evenly split between compositional practice, the A520 and A533-34 courses, theoretical study in the A531-32 sequence, and an A600 thesis. Surrounding this program is a variety of courses, with the exception of A400 Introduction to the Electroacoustic Studio, largely drawn from other departments. Introductory computer science was required, along with basic calculus and finite mathematics. From the music department, courses in composition, musicology, and theory were required, respectively, instrumentation, contemporary music, and the symphonic or chamber literature, acoustics, and electroacoustic technology. And if you'll flip your paper over and look at the next list, this next list tabulates the courses taught by Xenakis during his 5 years at Bloomington. In hiring Xenakis, Wilfred Bain, dean of the music school, was trying to make good on his unsuccessful attempt in the previous year to found an electroacoustic studio with Pietro Grossi as director. Bain had, in effect, $22,000 worth of studio equipment and a Moog synthesizer, but no one who knew what to do with them. During his time at IU, Xenakis was on campus part-time, perhaps as much as 10 weeks out of a 15-week semester, and perhaps as little as 5 weeks. Bain permitted his faculty to tour and maintain their professional commitments, provided they made up teaching time while on campus. For the first 3 years, Xenakis taught a single class under varying names. The first, Experimental Research in Theory, was the same course taught by Grossi in the fall of 1966, a T-series course indicating its sponsorship by the music theory department. In the spring of 1969, Xenakis' offering changed title to Mathematical and Automated Music, and sponsorship moved from the theory to the composition department's K-series offerings. Also that year, Robert Schallenberg, who founded the Electroacoustic Studio at the University of Iowa, was hired as assistant director of the CMAM. As a member of the theory faculty, Schallenberg taught some of the cognate courses for the CMAM program, such as acoustics of music, but seems to have had little impact otherwise. The fall of 1970 shows a dramatic increase in the number of courses taught by Xenakis. The purchase of additional equipment for computer sound synthesis had finally been made after a 3-year struggle with specifications and fundraising. This appears to have signaled a new phase for Xenakis and an increased commitment to the CMAM. Although the equipment had been purchased that fall, it didn't arrive on campus until January of 1971 and didn't actually function until the end of the spring semester. During Xenakis' tenure at Bloomington, the digital to analog converter was never without problems and never worked at its specified 50,000 samples per second data rate. Yuji Takahashi replaced Schallenberg in the fall of 1971, but his appointment was not renewed due to budgetary problems. The A400 Introduction to the Electroacoustic Studio was a popular course with an average of 25 students a semester. Xenakis' theory course, A531-32, which carried the mathematics prerequisites, typically had 2 or 3 students enrolled throughout this period. What did Xenakis teach, and how did he structure it? Interviews with his students recall intense periods of evening lectures while Xenakis was on campus, and subject matter that mostly went over their heads. Many stated that Xenakis taught from formalized music, but this seems largely an explanation in retrospect. The English edition was published by Indiana University Press at the end of 1971, so for the first 4.5 years, Xenakis students would have had to have relied on the French Musique Formelle of 1963, or the original essays published in Gravazaner Blatter, most of which were in English and I believe available at the music library. These essays, however, were derived from Xenakis' compositional experience with specific methods and works, and don't in themselves exhibit an overarching pedagogical theory from mathematical and automated music. During his first year in Bloomington, however, Xenakis worked on a statement of purpose for the CMAM, which outlined its program in pedagogy, research, and dissemination, and must have formed the basis for the creation of the master's degree program, as well as for fundraising proposals. The introduction to Xenakis' typescript of September 23, 1967, entitled Center of Mathematical and Automated Music, General Program and Organization, is worth quoting at some length. Quote, I want by this paper to define in its outlines a plan of labor almost original and which should bring, if trusted, a renewal of the studies in musical composition, a renewal necessary to grasp the completely new ideas as well as to control the various technological possibilities in an efficient and powerful way. Thus, following the example of the positive scientific thought, it is important to reconsider the whole phenomenon of music axiomatically from its fundamental laws and structures up to the most complex sound constructions. In this effort of recognition and of cognition, all the tools are necessary, those abstract, such as mathematical or physical or sociocultural theories, those concrete, such as electroacoustic chains, analog machines, or digital computers. It is impossible nowadays to think about doing music, experimental or instrumental, without having a solid basis of mathematics, logistics, acoustics, musicology, ethnomusicology. The future of music, and therefore the correct assimilation and the lessons of its past, depends, besides the natural talent, on the large widening of the knowledge. This paper divided the activities of the CMAM into 5 fields. In Xenakis' words, field alpha, theoretical teaching; beta, practice; gamma, fundamental research; delta, approaches of light compositions; and epsilon, external relations. In later drafts, these were condensed down into 3, pedagogy, research, and dissemination of results. Pedagogical activities were further broken down into primary and secondary structures in music, seminars and lectures in related subjects, and application into sound, or his original beta field of practice. His treatment of primary level structures in music reveal an approach organized differently from that of his book, Formalized Music. The primary levels concern what Xenakis termed extratemporal outside time structures, which have been presented in different ways as parts of the book chapters on Markovian stochastic music, symbolic music, and in Towards a Meta-Music, which treated the theories of his theory of sieves. His pedagogical program addresses these non-durational structures of music through the treatment of pitch, amplitude, and duration, among others, as vector spaces, from which various sets or collections can be postulated. The elementary transformations of these sets through logical and arithmetic transpositions is extended to both numerical codings for computation and geometrical or graphical codings, including traditional staff notation. Xenakis' category of secondary level structures correspond to many of the compositional techniques he is so well known for: probability, stochastic structures, and Markov chains, as well as the more determinate group constructions exemplified by nomos alpha and acrata. Xenakis also expected the CMAM to sponsor ongoing seminars in related fields. Accompanying the likely subjects of mathematics and computer science, Xenakis also listed architectural acoustics, psychology, and ethnomusicology. Xenakis' category of practice, or application into sound, is particularly interesting, stressing hands-on activity in 4 media categories: traditional instruments, the classical electroacoustic studio, the synthesis of sounds by computer, and finally, sound synthesis by what he termed, quote, proper analog systems. It's not immediately clear what Xenakis might have meant by this, but my guess is that it refers to the then novel synthesizers designed by Moog or Syncat and the like. Conversations with his studios have suggested that he was much more interested in, or perhaps familiar with, the traditional electroacoustic studio than the Moog synthesizer purchased by his predecessor Grossi, and so wished to make a separation between the two. Hands-on work with these systems was conceived as having students construct compositional models, mathematical or otherwise, to be realized in one of these media. Conversely, students were also expected to use electronic media to describe and analyze sound compositions and their structure, in effect the reverse of the first approach, moving from the concrete to the abstract. In the early years of the program, the best students, who had clear talents in either compositional or technical capacities, were employed to teach both each other and the remaining class members in Xenakis' absence. As I have mentioned, Xenakis' theoretical presentations were difficult to assimilate, and because many of the course students had previous electroacoustic experience, it's hard to picture Xenakis' participation in the studio courses. In the later years, 1970 to 72, much of the hands-on teaching was done by the studio engineer, who was also building the computer system. And so for a different reason, it's again hard to get any sense of Xenakis' teaching style apart from his lectures. In his 1970 essay for the New York Times entitled, "Is the University Too Much With Us?", Copeland observes, in spite of his reservations, that, quote, "the university is where the action is." Copeland traces the institutional motivation for Xenakis' presence on the university Indiana University campus to 1952 and Columbia University's first experiments in electronically produced sound. With the Rockefeller Foundation's assistance, Princeton joined Columbia with its research into 12-tone composition, and from there, UCLA's support for Lucas Foss and his improvisation chamber ensemble, Wesleyan's housing of John Cage and their publication of his writings, the furtherance of the Once Group by the University of Michigan, and the University of Chicago's sponsorship of the Frome concerts spawned a wave of interest in providing a forum for new composers and attempts to enhance the musical life of college communities. Copeland, who cites Stravinsky in support of his argument, is not so sure that the university is, quote, the right background for a composer. Was a Midwestern university then the right place for Xenakis to be, especially considering the numerous commissions that he enjoyed during the late 1960s? Indiana University was willing to provide him with expensive research tools and to publish his major writings on music, possibly the most extensive work of its kind at the time. Did Xenakis simply trade on his reputation and time to get these material advantages? Xenakis states his position in his interview with Varga, quote, I don't consider what I'm doing to be teaching. My pupils show me what they have composed and I tell them my opinion. When I'm lecturing, I talk not about my music, but about the ideas lying behind it. And he remarked to John Rockwell in 1976, quote, I don't think there are many working as I do, and I don't see them around me. The superficial aspect of my music has been taken by others, especially the Polish. But art is twofold. It has an immediate appeal, and then there is the thought behind it. Xenakis, then, did not confuse his individual point of view with the function of teaching. He viewed personal style as a superficial aspect of the music and preferred to lecture on the theory and methods that any given composition reflected. This stance was echoed at the time by others like William Schumann, former president of Juilliard, who commented that many college campuses, quote, support second-rate artists who give nothing but their own point of view to students. Schumann's call for teachers who could present all relevant points of view echoes Xenakis' desire to lecture about the ideas of music and to provide a forum for the consideration of a wide variety of expert views in the field of music and related research. Xenakis endeavored at Indiana University to build an institution within an institution. The CMON was expected to provide exchange and research across a wide variety of specialties. Xenakis attempted to generalize contemporary music studies, which stands as a strong contrast to Milton Babbitt's view of the universe as a university, as an isolated and specialized shelter from an insufficiently serious audience. In this, Xenakis has more in common with Buckminster Fuller or the cyberneticist Heinz von Förster than most contemporary academic composers. This view is best summed up in Xenakis' remark to Gail Stockholm of the Cincinnati Enquirer in February of 1972, about 3 months before tendering his resignation. We must fight this pressure to accept categorization and live like automatons. We must have the insight to deduce vital connections between specialized fields. This narrow outlook must be solved by new methods of education, not the usual dry, aseptic ones. It is so difficult to create a creative situation in teaching so that man's natural curiosity doesn't die or get suppressed in our social environment. Specialized man is a kind of ghetto man. He can only go on one level of experience in one direction. To get out of the ghetto, he has to fight, to learn many difficult things. In the course of his career, Xenakis approached teaching with the same degree of seriousness he did his compositional work, and desired through the formation of the CMAM and its parallel institution, EMAMU in Paris, nothing less than the, quote, revitalization of music as an art in education and society. Thank you.